And we are live. Welcome, world, to the Paradoxilectic podcast, which sometimes gets called erroneously, but maybe is the the Paradialectical. It's the Paradoxilectic podcast, and today we are talking about toxic positivity. Why avoiding negativity sometimes affects us negatively. And we're going to be having a what is called a dialectic conversation about that. I'm here with Magic and Eric Miller, PhD. Eric,
And
what is a dialectic?
so the dialectic means that if we're talking about toxic positivity, then we're going to talk about also the more obvious toxic negativity or toxic toxicity. The concept here that the extremes, when we get stuck in them either way, it tends to be a problem. And that really what we want is to be able to act and choose from that entire adaptive range. We want to be positive when being positive is efficacious. And we want to focus on the negative when focusing on the negative helps us. But more importantly, we want to be able to be flexible based on the circumstance that we're in. And that's really kind of the heart of what we talk about here. How do you get unstuck from those extremes?
Calling a thing toxic is kind of an irony of this, because that is something that I have noticed for sometimes. If there is something that sometimes causes a bad, or a lot of the time, maybe 78%, maybe 99%, we put toxic hyphen in front of it, and it becomes toxic positivity, toxic masculinity, toxic.
And that's part of what makes extremes. And I think that's a beautiful point. And so I was really excited when you wanted the topic to be toxic positivity, because we can talk about the positive part of that, or we can talk about the judgment that is the word toxic. And I think part of one thing that we really try to explore here is, well, what are the things that throw us to extremes, right? And judgments crystallize thought. Robert Anton Wilson, who is one of my favorite jokester philosophers of all time, said, or quoted, I can't remember which, that belief is the death of thought. And not just belief, but judgment. The second we judge something, we judge ourselves as being stupid or not good enough or too worried, all of a sudden we're a caricature of ourselves. And if our neighbor is that asshole, now all of a sudden they're a villain, they're a caricature. And we lose that ability to adapt and to see the depth and richness of whatever we're talking about. But sometimes people become caricatures of themselves, which kind of brings us back to toxic positivity. So I guess I'm going to throw it back to you guys. Like, what are some examples that you've come across of toxic positivity? What are examples of it?
Well, Magic, as a 100% good person, what's your opinion about calling people good or bad? Because I've observed you our entire time, and you are 100% good, positive, truth, love, and light. So your opinion really.
I also had many skulls surrounding my wedding, so I don't know about all of that. Okay. I appreciate that, though. I mean, for me, the biggest glaring example of toxic positivity is like the Instagram yoga teacher, like that type of loving light. I mean, living as a yoga teacher in that world, and I've dabbled in that world, especially at festivals. It starts to grind down on you. Yeah, there's a level of self-hatred when that toxic or when that negativity starts to bubble up. I think it causes some cognitive dissonance there when you really just need that love and light, just get it in there, and soon the negativity will take over.
And that's where I really enjoyed your, I can't remember, what did you call them? Where we were having the cocktails with the yoga and just bringing some like silliness to the levity that I think we can get lost in sometimes. And I think, so we already have some kind of great comments here. So Matthew is talking about the difference between faith and the belief and the way he defines them. And to him, belief is malleable and faith tends to be pretty immovable. In my work as a therapist, I find people with beliefs that are sometimes pretty immovable. Like sometimes people mistake their beliefs for the real world. But I think it's also true that I think in common culture, faith kind of demands like this unwaverable, unmovable thing. And then that also kind of gets into a bit of a dialectic, right? So when it comes to something as serious as religion, like if you're ultra serious about it, where's that flexibility, right?
I have something to say about seriousness.
Aha.
So I may come across to many that experience me on what could be called a good day as an optimistic, happy person. And if I could try to explain what I think it has been the most helpful thing for me being able to show up that way consistently, or just relative to, I don't know, somebody who is really misanthropic all the time, it is my front of mind awareness that I make that like that is a daily mantra. Like, I'm gonna die, it's probably gonna hurt, there's gonna be a lot of difficulty along the way, that and having an irreverent attitude about that, and being able to, I gotta bring up ketamine therapy, being able to I mean, this is where MDMA therapy is this as well, but I really understood it because I was able to seek that in Michigan, to be able to have a conversation that you, in your quote unquote normal state, your unaltered state, would cower from because that hurts so much. To say, to induce a state neurochemically where that is where you're, I call it being diagonal from your ego, to the point where I can observe, oh, that hurts Zachary, but let's talk about it because there's probably a reason why that hurts Zachary. Like, so that's the ketamine state. With MDMA therapy, it seems that it's like, some neurological jargon that I don't understand about the amygdala, whatever. Get the person, the brain, so in bliss, happy, love, accept. I'm afraid of nothing, and I just want to embrace all that is reality. It's all beautiful. And now let's talk about the most intense trauma of your life. So that's what I do with humor, and we're all gonna die. We're all gonna die. Life is suffering. We're all gonna die. We're all dying. And the thing where something like 50% of all of reality seems to me to be eternally, essentially darkness and difficulty and death. Let's just say that right off the bat and try to have the most beautiful day we can.
And I mean, so many traditions, so many of the experiential traditions, whether it's Sufism or Buddhism or Hinduism, have these kind of death practices where you picture yourself dying. That is the meditation. And so many of the ways that these kind of deeper traditions are presented in the West is very positive. And even when people kind of give lip service in the modern mindfulness and the modern yoga movement to making room for negative emotions, that it's so ingrained in our culture in so many different ways to avoid and not face that part of you. I think that's also part of what really draws people to that toxic positivity side of these movements. And whether it's counseling, whether it's yoga, whether it's kind of like these online gurus, like, people want to escape, people want to have hope, people want to feel good. And a lot of times people want something simple, and they want somebody that they can envy and look up to. And I think there's a kind of an archetype out there that people can play that's really attractive to that part of ourself that wants clean, perfect, beautiful things.
Painful, not difficult. That's like practice, like not being good at something yet, or as one will often utter, I suck at this, or I can't do that.
Yeah.
Becoming good at something like spinning a thing that's on fire around performance art, or being articulate. That, like, learning a new language, holy fuckaroo! Like, how how bad it feels for me to feel so stupid, knowing that when I switch into Spanish, I'm a 2-year-old. And I and that is an uncomfortable place to feel inept. And so with any skill, it's like, if we're avoiding the negativity of the difficulty of learning, then we just leave it there as, I don't do that. I don't beatbox. 4 years ago, or I don't remember how many years ago, that was my stance on beatboxing. I don't do that. But really what it ended up being is, it makes me feel really inferior to the really good beatboxers when I attempt to do that, because I suck, and spending more time in the difficulty. So the same thing, I see it as very similar with learning and understanding yourself. Self-actualization is a process of, there's something that's gonna hurt to spend time in, but I want what's on the other side of that.
Right. So in the kind of the approach that I work with a lot, we talk about how our values are found in our pain. And this kind of explains why a lot of times we play this game. So let's take a simple example, because we could take some really heavy examples, but kind of let's dip our toe in the water and talk about worry instead of something really heavy like trauma, which we can get there. But like, just kind of take a moment and think about what happens in your brain when you worry, right? What kind of happens is, you're like, well, life's good. There's this thing I want. And then all of a sudden these voices pop up in your head. It's going to go bad. Or you're going to fuck it up. And all of a sudden you're kind of drawn to this pain. You're kind of drawn to this pain, and you start to imagine all the ways that this can go wrong. And then you don't want that. So you move away, and you feel good for a little bit because you moved away. You think about these good things, but then you get drawn back. And the question is, why do you keep getting drawn back to pain? And so, like, if you go to like behavioral psychology, they say you do what you're reinforced by. So why would you come back to worry? Why would you come back to these horrible, painful thoughts? Well, the reason often is because there's something important in there that, until you go into that pain and you really sit with it and you really relax with it, that you can see it for what it is, the thing that you care about. So when your pet dies, you hurt because of all the memories that you have, because of how much you love that thing. That pain is usually equal to how much we value something. And I think this is why that toxic positivity gets toxic, is because it says somehow you can have this joy and this pain and all this meaning without that other side. And that becomes problematic.
Mm-hmm. As you mentioned, the Instagram yoga teachers, as you put it, for our listeners in 2074, when Instagram has been lost to the annals of time. Instagram was a social networking vista that is very about appearances, because you must, in order to express to Instagram, you must give us your image. And I think of I've heard the phrase "good vibes only." From that sector of humanity, if you will call it, of the consciousness community. What have been your experiences, Magic, with good vibes only? Does that work as a rule?
Absolutely not. So a lot of things just kind of went through my mind while I was watching that dialectic. So really, the one important thing to always keep in mind is how much challenge is the force that creates change. Without that challenge, I think it's a famous example is like the lobster needs to like break free of its shell, and it gets really uncomfortable in the shell. It sucks. Without it sucking, it's not gonna grow. It's not gonna grow into the fabulous lobster that it's meant to be. And how many times can you think in your life of these challenging parts that really just turned into what made you who you are? Without challenge, we don't grow as people, flat out. And then when it comes to that consciousness movement and the Instagram yogis, I was very tempted to go down that path as a yoga teacher, and I kind of saw myself falling into that, and then realized that when I'm following people, on the people who inspire me the most are the ones who are real, who are able to say, today really fucking sucked. and this is why. And I had to eat a bunch of ice cream today, and it wasn't pretty. But knowing that, like, that helps me value myself on my own journey. So there's not this awful comparison mindset with I'm not good enough to feel love and light. Because you can feel love and light, but you need that comparison. Without the darkness, you can't feel the light. There's nothing to compare it to.
Yeah. Trying to appear as the ideal all the time stops us from getting closer to it, if there is such a thing.
And it gets annoying. I think, I don't know if my personal filter's just gotten better at it, or if it's like an actual movement where people are starting to see through that veil. Yeah, I'm not sure which one it is. Hopefully people are just seeing through it. But
well, I think there's two different ways to be a role model. One is to give a perfect example of what the ideal human should look like. And then there's a person who's competent and realizes that you have to be awkward when you're trying something new. You're going to mess up once in a while, and that people can see you like recover. And it's almost like all of us have been either in the performance world to some degree. So what do the best buskers do? Like the best jugglers, the best contact jugglers, the best fire performers, like, because you got those the tech folks that try to exude perfection. And who are they performing for?
No one themselves.
And the performers, right?
Yeah.
But the ones that really connect the audience are the ones that are so good they have to fake messing up so that humanity is drawn in, and they kind of bring the crowd into it. They're like, look how dangerous the thing is. I've got fire by my face. And they're not a danger. They know what they're doing, but they create that illusion of danger because it's that shared humanity that really connects people. Yeah. And I think that's one of the challenges with the toxic positivity is I think it's really isolating for those who have it. So for people who aspire to be leaders, or people who aspire to be perfect in a certain way, and they try to hold themselves to this, that when we kind of get a one-up relationship, it's easy to mistake admiration or like jealousy or respect for connection. And as, again, going back to Robert Anton Wilson, he always would say, real connection only happens between equals. And you have to do that by being human, by having your flaws available to people.
Well, there's the thing that I've been thinking about with yogis, and I have a friend who does angel therapy. Like, she works with, if you want to be Jungian, the archetype of the angel, which is pure positivity, help, healing, and if you spiritual, literal angels, and that there is an element of a service that is being provided. With the yogi, there's that. With me, sometimes as an entertainer, I've been in spaces before where it's like, oh shit, these people want happy stuff. It's like, all right, I guess I'm going to do that. And then there's a grand conversation that about can you do capitalism well whilst also being completely authentic? And before you make your niche out of being sincere and authentic and being fallible, I see that is when you can unleash the full authenticity. And a lot of us are just struggling with, well, I have to make ultimately some sort of sale, and that sale may be contingent upon my being a happy, loving, positive force, or at least in this moment. Like that, it's like, in this interaction with customer, it's like, I'm going to be positivity because that is what they may be paying me for. Or that is what is going to decide whether or not they will pay me for something. It's like whether or not I appear to be the positivity that's going to help them, which finding more and more that whatever form of therapist you are, whether it be, any form of anything that's a conversation, if you're doing any sort of coaching, you're in a conversation with someone, and the desire to turn money into the value of making me feel better, having me solve my problems, I think we need to completely dispense with. And that's what I would like to accomplish with this podcast and with the just all conversations about this is it's difficult to get to ideal places.
It is
that thing that you want to I mean, that's a whole other tangent of the capitalistic customer client service provider thing. Can you be authentic during that? When often the authentic thing to do is like, you got fucking problems. It's going to be difficult. We might have to give you some psychedelics and sit you down on a couch and talk to you for 3 hours as you cry a lot.
And I think you really hit something here, because I think kind of why that toxic positivity is there is because that archetype is really easy to fall into. It's a clear, simple script that if you play it, you're going to get a certain audience. Mm-hmm. And what you said also kind of tied into this other piece, which, because you mentioned therapy and counseling. And I think kind of like the performance, the equivalence to performance that either performative yoga instructor, that performative performer that's exuding this positivity, like that's easy in a way because it's a simple character. And on the flip side, like in therapy and counseling, it's the easiest way to do counseling is to just empathize and validate everything the other person says. And I think a lot of people now have this kind of thing that, well, that's what therapy is. It's eternal empathy and validation. And it's kind of like if I go to a massage therapist and I have like just torn my rotator cuff and I had surgery on my shoulder, and I'm like, well, I could go to physical therapy where I have to work every day and it's going to hurt. Or I could just get massaged and iced down every day, right? It's going to feel good. And that feeling good, the challenge there is, does it heal? Do you get stronger? Do you get more flexible? And I think that's really the question, which is, if you don't challenge people, if you just validate. Now, here's the thing. If you don't hear people, no one's ever going to listen. If you're not kind, you're not loving, and you're not warm, like that's part of what builds real friendships. But again, the friends who I value the most are the ones authentically. And I had a friend do this to me today. They're like, I don't agree with something you're doing, and here's why. I'm like, oof. I'm like, let's talk about this. And that was a hard conversation, but I know that person is authentic because they came to me face to face. They didn't have to say that. They didn't have to have that difficult conversation, and they did. And I fucking love them for it. Like, that's great.
Yeah. Well, it's like hedonism versus what's opposite of hedonism?
Stoicism, aestheticism, or what is it? Like living a Spartan lifestyle, living a lifestyle.
A general term for being goal oriented in some way. So so you've got the immediate pleasure, feel good now, and then there's become what we're becoming. Jordan Peterson talks about this a lot, and I can't talk about him without doing his voice. It's like, we're giving people so much credit and just applause for who they are and what you are now, that you're enough. We tell people they're enough. Gee, but what about what you could become? That's what you should be most interested in, what you're becoming. And so that thing, do I have immediate pleasure of, let's say we establish a good vibes only space. Let's say we get we can have 10-person parties now in the state of Michigan. There's a pandemic happening for those of you tuning in 2000. I think that's going to be talked about forever. So never mind. When the coronavirus pandemic was happening, we are now allowed to have 10-person gatherings. Maybe your 10-person bonfire is all people who are completely self-actualized and awesome, and there's no disagreements at all between you. There's no negative social dynamics, and you can just have that bonfire and be on an IV drip of MDMA the whole time and just have a purely positive hedonic party. Or you can have the little difficult things that we're always doing, and I find we do it more when we party. That's why I use the term festimony for festivals that are also ceremonies. Mm-hmm. Festivals, to me, seem to have the same hallmarks as plant medicine, ayahuasca, psilocybin ceremonies that I have, let's just say, endured before. There's fun parts in that too. There can be a dance party afterward, but that container is talked about as this is going to be difficult, and this is about healing, this is about processing, as where the festival is, we're going to have a party, like Burning Man, we're going to have a party in the desert. It's not framed as, this is going to be difficult as fuck, and it's going to bring up everything about you that you're insecure about, and there's going to be moments of severe emotional pain, and then there's also going to be a party where not everybody who's at festivals are participating in the festimony like lucidly, but I've noticed that when we get together and party a lot, because we loosen up and take substances and enter novel states in which we behave in these novel ways, we come into difficulties with each other, and it is oh so much better, I'm finding, to do the emotional intelligence dance and talk about stuff the second it comes up.
Or at some point, like, so I think it might be really useful right now to really kind of name the dynamic that we're kind of dancing around right now, which to me is really that balance between acceptance and change. How do you accept yourself and understand that if you're trying something new, you're not going to be good at it by definition because it's new to you, right? So we have this, we kind of view ourselves as this interconnected web of habits. If you're trying to like move a new habit into that thread, you have to move all the other threads. Like, that's going to be awkward. You're not going to do it well. That's how it goes. And the same thing with other people. Like, if there's not room for acceptance and warmth and welcoming, it's hard to have a community or a friendship. But if you're demanding acceptance only from yourself, or you're demanding acceptance only from other people, then you don't have that change piece. And here's the thing, the world is always moving. So if you're not changing, you're falling behind. You're gonna get hurt in other ways. And that's where that positivity becomes toxic, because if you're always accepting and you're not changing, you're not adapting, and then you are dying.
I wanted to bring up this this comment by Phoenix. There's nothing inherently toxic about choosing to accept that which comes your way. And that's a good way of saying, yeah, what comes up, what comes your way. And that is the act of accepting. I think a synonym for accept is love. Like, the way we love each other is we show up together, and whatever comes our way, that ultimately is the stuff of each other, we accept that. And part of accepting sometimes is like, you could change that. You could be a little better. You could be a little better tomorrow. You could be a little better by the end of tonight. That act of always bringing each other closer to our ideal is, it's interesting. It's like, I accept you for who you are. And the people that I accept, the people that I love most, I hold their dicks to the fire more. For that was a weird turn of phrase. I hold their appendage to the fire. The people that I have the closest, most full spectrum accepting relationship with, those are the relationships where it's like, you were a dick the other night, you know, or like that right there. Or I really love to have understandings with those around me where they will remind me, and I can remind them, I think you're lying to yourself. Check, because the more that you can be reminded of that, to look again, it's like, are you lying to yourself? If you don't have that voice within, sometimes an external, another person being like, I think you're lying to yourself, especially if you know they love you.
Right. Or, and here's the thing. And sometimes, I mean, we've been talking about this as like you're doing okay or you're doing wrong. Like, that's a dichotomy, but sometimes sometimes the people you love have different values than you, and you're not wrong and they're not wrong. You're just different. And I think that's an important space as well, because I think dialectics allow for that. It allows for the people around you to be right and to be valid and to be about their own approach to the world. And so can you. And I think that when you're in a creative community like this one, that's one of the ultimate challenges. Because when I say this one, so for those who are listening to this podcast in other times and spaces, I'm talking kind of about the broader Detroit creative community, where we have people of, and I think I mentioned this last time, every gender, every approach to sexuality, every approach to making money, every approach to expressing themselves, different mediums, different shows, different ways of doing it, different thoughts on capitalism, libertarianism, socialism. And what kind of, when we start to judge things dichotomously, this is good and this is bad, and we're judging the middle, not the extremes. So for example, if I'm going around randomly punching people in the face, non-consensually, we can kind of say objectively, that's probably bad, not helping the community at all. But I find most behaviors probably fall into that acceptable middle. And then this is really a challenge of, in a creative community like this one, we're going, hey, we're here because we are all different. How do you make more room for those differences? And how do you have hard conversations that make you uncomfortable because of those differences without it becoming you're wrong, I'm not talking to you, or cutting off a certain segment of people? Because that is kind of what fragments a community like this one.
I think one key aspect of that is just realizing that we're all living. I mean, I'm a big proponent of multidimensional theories. Like, I think we all live in different realities, and those realities are completely guided by how we were brought up, by all of our past experiences, by the world that we live in right now. And so by always having that in mind, that someone's frame of reference is completely different to yours, it's a lot easier to be accepting of how someone else's approach to life.
You teach yoga. You guide people through specifically stretchy time yoga. I don't know the proper term for it when you're specifying that it's the stretchy time.
There are many, yes. Sometimes I stretch, yes.
Okay, so I
pretzel people into uncomfortable positions and make them meditate into them. Yes,
exactly. Yeah. So that I'm thinking about the archetype of the all love and light yoga teacher, the infuriatingly positive, and you just feel that gentle stretch.
Blossom the anus.
Yeah, and ultimately, with like my understanding of when I yoga, when I do stretchy time alone, stretchy breathy time, when I do any sort of like, I am leaning into, I mean, well, the metaphor of stretch too. We stretch emotionally. I'm trying to get right up to the place where what I can stand.
It's finding your edge.
Yeah.
Comes up a lot. Finding your edge, not going past your edge, because that's when injury happens. But when you find your edge, that's when growth happens.
So that voice of being really positive about it, I wonder, like, because I've been led with yoga with you, and you're very, it's good to have a very kind and very like encouraging voice of now we're doing this, you're gonna feel that. But you don't hear many being like, this one's gonna fucking hurt, and now you're doing it. That sucks, doesn't it? Yeah.
I've heard a couple movements of people, and I did a couple like beer and cocktail hour yogas, but a metal yoga where you're just yelling at people. Anger yoga sounds great.
Metal as in
listen to metal and like, this fucking sucks. Great. Yeah, because I mean, that's only it's making people realize that this isn't easy. It's not supposed to be easy. If yoga is easy, well, sometimes yoga should be easy because life is hard and it's nice to have that balance.
Life is suffering. That's indisputable.
But yeah, a lot of the time yoga sucks. That's why it's good for you, because it makes you stretch.
And hold on that. Like it's always like, if you have a form of spirituality where you have to go to a specific place to experience it, like, how is that spirituality? Like, spirituality is present in every aspect of everything. So when people go like, well, metal yoga would be a bastardization of yoga, like, I'm not so sure about that, because you have samurai Zen and you have mountaintop Zen, right? You've got people sitting peacefully on the top of mountaintops and cleaning toilets in a monastery, and you have people going to war with swords in their hands, right? These are both Zen. Like, what's more metal than samurai?
The last thing you do in yoga is corpse pose. It's literally called corpse pose.
That's so metal.
Yeah.
We're gonna die? Wait, we're gonna die?
Yeah.
So this brings me, there's a quote here. So there's a lot of good quotes. This is going back to Lindsay's. It's also about the hard truths. There's so much fake happy out there because people submit and suppress their voice to make others feel comfortable and keep the space. It starts a war within. It's important to have a safe space to express. Otherwise, it gets passed on from generation to generation. So I think that this really kind of gets back to the opposite, the flip side of what I said before was, I was saying, and this is the dialectic, I was saying that sometimes we over-validate and over-emphasize and over-create safe spaces. But that's the dialectic, that it is so important that we do those things and that we really validate and we do care and we allow people who don't normally have a voice to express, because what we're expressing there is pain. And I think this is also part of the thing about toxic positivity is sometimes it's really hard. It's easy to like exude positivity because we want to feel good and other people feel good. But I think what's is we're empathetic. It can be really hard to feel other people's pain when they're expressing themselves because we feel that pain.
Yeah. Oh man, my mind went to the most intense example, which I will. We're doing. Yeah, we're doing. Which is how are we going to address and take steps for there to be less of something that is so awful and so disgusting to think about that most of us don't want to. How do people become pedophiliacs? If we don't ask that question, we're not defending children, and we're not. Yeah, we need that. Having that difficult conversation is the defense of what could be prevented future cases, future instances, because that it must exist as some reverberating traumatic thread in a person. That's the only thing I could think that could be.
That's a great way to put that, reverberating thread, because it's in this right now. I'm in a trauma and crisis class, so lots of these topics are on my mind, and it's so much of the time it is a thing that is passed on from generation to generation. It is a thread of abuse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So similar to Chrissy, back as a martial arts instructor, I worked with people on both sides. So I worked with people who've been abused in all sorts of ways and wanted to learn strength. And I also worked with people who realized that they were bullies or abusers or violent. And they heard that the martial arts would calm them down. And I also worked with military and ex-military, and I worked with police officers who had to work with violence in different ways all the time. And martial arts, I think, is a great example of this idea of moving away from toxic positivity, because here you are learning how to deal with both the repercussions of violence and the desire to do violence through a violent art. Like that is kind of the opposite of toxic positivity. And one of the things that really kind of made me understand what toxic positivity was is I started teaching when I was really young. I got thrown in, long story, not going to get into it here, but I was thrown into running the main floor of a studio when I was 21. I was good for my weight class, but I weighed $120. So I'm like soaking wet. And I had like these big guys in, and I was like a nice guy. And so what I would do is, like, if they're big, tough people and they had their guard down and they're higher rank, I would hit them. But I didn't want to hit certain people because I still kind of felt hitting was bad. And so as they went up in rank, they felt that they were better than they were. And they went to a bar and they took a stronger boundary than they might have normally, because they thought they were like more skillful than they were. And they got hurt because of that. And that was a really humbling moment for me. And it really woke me up to that idea that good things aren't always good. Good things are not always positive. And this started to force me to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, hitting my higher ranked students and not just the tough ones. Of course, with their consent, of course, on the floor, and doing so with respect and warmth. Because the phrase I would always use with them is, it's so much better to be hit by a friend respectfully and with compassion than it is by a stranger in a bar.
Yeah.
You never know where they're going to go because you never know what happened to them.
And that can come back to your friend is calling you out is much better than someone who doesn't give a shit about you calling you out.
So, and again, I got to say that again, friends who I care about and respect, and I think this is one of my favorite terms, come at me with a compassionate truth. Mm-hmm. There's a difference between a harsh truth or an injurious truth and a compassionate truth.
Yeah, I feel like when we deny what's coming up that is difficult, that is uncomfortable, it's like we just stretch pain across time.
It's always going to come back.
Yeah, it's like a slow IV drip as opposed to a DMT blast off of. Well, not even necessarily that. Having it all happen it doesn't all happen at once. That's why I don't like this term healing. I don't think it works for me, how I experience that. I've never experienced something to be healed, and I think it's just as I get off on a lot of linguistic tangents, side quests about a word, but for me, that word, I could see it having problems in giving somebody that is the goal, to be healed. It's not, we're not taking the trauma away. We're not sealing a wound. Like wounds heal, they close up and they somewhat they like disappear. And we're trying to find a place for your most painful stuff, if you want to say your karma, if you want to say your traumatic thread, and have it find its place in the mosaic that is you, or how you behave, how you show up in the world. I'm sure you could say a lot about that, Brick.
Yeah, and this actually really gets to something that you and I were talking about just before the show, because you had mentioned karma. And there's two different theories of karma. One is karma, you do something bad and something bad's going to happen to you. But if you look around, maybe it happens 5 lifetimes later, but it definitely doesn't always happen in this life, right? So I think there's some pretty strong evidence of that at this moment.
A buckaroo of a cinematic suggestion of a homework, the film The Fisher King.
Oh, that's a great movie.
I have now attempted to put this into my consciousness twice, and something happened. Both I watched it in a novel state. God, it seems like I just live my life in novel states. There are times when I am not on psychedelics, but both the times watching this, it was it was so. And I was watching the movie. I was letting it come into me, but I theorized to my friend that what was happening, of like, because I get to the end, I'm like, what the fuck just happened? It's like opening a portal to, like, that movie describes what trauma is. So it articulates it in the way that only cinema can.
So remind me, because I remember loving that movie, and it's Terry Gilliam who did it, and he's an astounding director, but it's been a long time since I saw it. So
it's hard to just it's hard to explain. It's Robin Williams.
Yep.
Robin Williams and Jeff Bridges, who's the dude. Yeah, it's you know what? I'm just gonna put that in there as like a homework assignment if you want it, because it's a fuckaroozle of a thing to absorb. And that the idea of like ancestral generational trauma, like I sometimes just, it's like I have to pick the language of who I'm talking to. So it could be something that's in your DNA, or we could talk about it as your karma, or we could talk about it as the curriculum of your shamanic spirit quest. But whatever it is, it's the same thing we're talking about. There seems to be something that you are born with that is a specific pain,
or that you pick up through your environment. And this is where it leads me to that other definition of karma. And and this might kind of be the antidote to your term healing. And it's the idea that all sorts of things are going to happen to us. And many of those things are going to be horribly painful to us. And here's what this is something that I really want to speak to, especially at this time with COVID going around. There's a lot of people right now who feel like their pain isn't worthy to talk about because they see so many people with worse pain. And I think this becomes really, really important, because when we talk about this karma, So there's this karma that is all of the things that came together to form you, and whether that's DNA that formed the emotional centers of your brain that made certain emotions more raw and painful for you than anybody else, or it's the life events that happen to you, that there are some things, like I've had some things happen in the last few years where I literally work with people who've gone through some of the most objective, worst things that you can imagine happening to a human being. And here I am feeling this extreme pain from something that next to that feels like this big. But that's my karma, because what happened to me at a certain time in my life made that particular spot in my brain really, really painful. And I don't need to heal that. I need to somehow integrate that. And more importantly, while I'm integrating that, I have to try not to be an asshole to other people. And to me, that's what karma is. Taking whatever's been given to you and trying to bring enough awareness to it where even if you're still sitting with that pain, that you're doing your best to not inflict knowing pain or reactive pain onto other people because of the pain that you've had. And that's a hard thing to do sometimes.
I want to read our friend Giraffe says, all actions fall into three modes: goodness, passion, ignorance. Karma is activity in the material world, which always entangles one in some reaction, whether good or bad. So I don't know the terms to talk about this not spiritually, but I observe that what we're in could be called a dream. And this may seem strange to one, but from all that I've observed, I think that when I die, I become something unified or whole that I am right now fractured as. Or if I could bring you in on this, we are currently fractured. That is why it makes sense to me to say that life is suffering. Life is us being apart, and it's awkward, and things get fucked. And people, and there's moments of coming togetherness, like fucking, and or having a dance party, or just have a rousing game of chess, whatever. There's moments where we are so connected that it's like whoa, it's you're getting a glimpse of the dream, and that's why we say that it's dreamy. It was a dream, like it was like a dream. Anyway, so that's what I have come to think of this word healing. It's like I will be healed when I die. And but here
you'll be coming back together with the whole.
Yes. Here,
one thing I want to mention about that, because I'm on the same tip as you. That's like my spirituality is we are nodes on the spider web, and God is this whole entire spider web. But
another Indra's net of jewels is that.
What's that?
Have you heard the myth of Indra's net of jewels?
Yep, exactly. Same thing.
So we're a jewel in the center of the web that reflects the light of every jewel around us, and that's kind of the flow of consciousness.
Yeah, or like I think it's Alan Watts who says the different facets of a diamond. The diamond is the Godhead, but in our separation. Matthew Peterson a while ago said pure love and light was boring, and that's why we split from the source and started the reality fractal. So, and it comes back to what you were saying too, Zach, about the festival room of hedonism where we're all love and light. How long can we be all love and light before that becomes incredibly boring? And we need to stretch, and we need to get out of that room and see what else is going on. I like to think of that Godhead, maybe it was just bored. He, they, whatever, it was bored and wanted to stir some things up. It wanted to meet itself and see itself. And so we split up, and then we come back together when we die, and then we split up again.
Yeah.
And along the line, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, maybe I shouldn't, because I was about to say the darkest thing.
No, that's exactly what you should say.
Okay, well, I often think of it as, the I has had the experience of both being the Nazi in the guard tower and the one being guarded.
If we're one with everything, we're one with
Everything. Mm-hmm.
We're one with Pol Pot. We're one with Hitler. We're one with the most enlightened being.
Wait,
like,
not Donald Trump though. not
sorry, that messiness. Because I think that's where you get to the other side. Because when you want that intellectual perfection, you become Agent Smith in the Matrix, right? Like your sweat and your mucus, and that scene where he's just hating all things that are human. That is the other side of not letting that messiness and that awkwardness and that this ugliness that is part of being alive in. If you don't make room for it and love it, you become this over intellectualized thing, which I think that is sociopathy. That is the most dangerous.
Yeah.
Because that intellect without feeling, without engagement with the world, that is truly dangerous.
By having this intensely external relationship with Donald Trump, we have pushed him out of the circle. I remember when he became president, I had an ayahuasca ceremony very, 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 very shortly after that. I was like, whoa, this is going to be okay. That it's like, I sure hope if it was just me and him and we were just the village, then it would be like, all right, this guy annoys the fuck out of me. But if we're in a conversation, if we're in a dialect, if we're not so adversarial in our relationship, we're just like, fuck you, stay away from me, become the rotting nightmare that you are over there, like when we're around each other and when we are a village, we become more each other. We tend to, like, we get closer to the ideal, or what could be called the center. And with this, the left right paradigm spectrum in the United States right now, it is so fever pitch, starkly divided, and it would be so much less unhealthy. I mean, I think that it's causing its own psychopathy at this point. Like, by being so far away from each other and just being like the radical left. Well, he's a Canadian, but anyway, just the liberal scum sort of well, libtard is the word that is said. However, that has a term in it that, anyway, not getting into linguistic side quests. There are people who fucking hate liberals, man. And I work with one.
Probably because of their toxic positivity.
Yeah, thank you, Chrissy, because I was about to jump in and say the same thing.
Yeah.
I work with a gentleman now. I just wanted to say this. He's like, I haven't been around a full-fledged conservative often in life for the last 4 years. We've been so separated, and I feel I don't have Republican leaning friends. I think I did it. I did at one point. I remember being around not like a necessarily a good mix. I've always, but anyway, it's having someone around me who is nice, and kind. But if we get into a certain subject, we're so divided that we just like, fuck it, we'll not talk about it, because it's going to be like, I want to ask him soon, like, you're a kind person, like you're a nice guy. I would like you to try to explain to me how is it that you think that Trump is necessary for getting your, just anyway, but not to get into the specifics of that conversation. It's like, it would be so much better if we could talk. We come down from this fight pose and get more to like, what's going on there? Don't you think we could find something a little more saner of a compromise than what we've got going on right now, which is fuck you, die, stay over there?
So, Chrissy, I want to really kind of hear more about what you think about that idea of toxic positivity on the left, because I think we are all kind of pretty clearly on the left side of the spectrum. And I think that there's the dialectical trench or gutter that I like to talk about on either side, right? And if we get stuck in that, then it goes too far. So what's kind of your conception of toxic positivity on the left?
So for some reason, it reminds me a little bit of going back to festival stuff, like how Burning Man allows for this place of, this is going to be really beautiful, but it's also going to hurt. And sometimes you're going like, this is also dangerous. It's not. So I feel like the left has this way of cushioning things so much that it becomes out of reality. It's no longer real. You can't say anything anymore without pissing people off. And
And the concept that people being upset in itself is somehow bad, not inevitable.
People are unable to be uncomfortable. They're unable to have these tough conversations and to talk it out without thinking it's an attack on them and taking it incredibly personally. And so it's just created this huge dichotomy of right and left against each other.
You said like being good at feeling bad, like it's a skill to become comfortable with discomfort to the point where it's like, all right, we're going into some difficult subject matter, or being in the presence of someone who disagrees with you. I mean, that is something that is so alarmingly obvious right now. There's people who like, I mean, a good example is if anyone who voted for Trump, delete me from Facebook right now. I don't want you in my peripheral. I don't want you in my life. Now, I totally understand the sentimentality of that because
because we're not dealing with the toxicity.
That's why we're so starkly contrasted, is because we've pushed each other so much away. And now he is a particular situation, but when we're just in a room and we're just people who have, when it's just me and somebody who maybe on the other side of the political spectrum, which I do argue is like, I think it's a false paradigm. I think that I think that we're out of it now. I don't think that it's just as simple as just left or right now. We're out of survival series mode. We could be out of survivalism with this planet as far as what we're doing with the resources. And now, like, universal basic income doesn't land on the left or the right to me. It's what we got to do for this situation. Anyway, yeah, going into the political
coming back to Trump, because you asked the question here, what is Trump? And we go back to Indra's net of jewels. We come back to this web of consciousness. Trump does not exist in isolation. Trump, in part, is a reaction to something else that's become very extreme in our society, right? And I think that, so one of the most powerful books that I've ever read, and it really applies to both my previous career as a martial artist and my current career as a therapist, working largely with people who've been in combat, and in many cases, is the book on killing. And it talks about how death and killing in today's society is treated like sex was in the Victorian era. It's either hidden away, you cover the piano legs with knitted socks because the piano legs are too sexy, or, I think it only makes the piano legs more sexy. Am I right?
Yeah.
Or you make it a cartoon and it's exaggerated. And I think we've done this with this natural tendency towards with violence and greed and this desire to take care of our family and those who are close to us. Whereas you have this other movement that says the entire earth, the entire human race is our family, or all things living are our family. And we've got two big dialectics there that we don't know how to integrate. And the more that we say that I can somehow live my life without making other people uncomfortable, and if I do that, I am doing something wrong, like that feels like a dialectical gutter to me. And then you get the opposite side, which is I'm going to do what the fuck I want, no matter who it hurts.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happens when you get more people in these two extremes. You get more people over here, you get more people over here. And the question is, how do you get into that effective, vital middle that doesn't go to those extremes, but understands that both are important? We need to look for the planet, but in order to do that, we need to eat things. Even when we're eating plants, that's still taking up land on this planet that belongs to forests. Like, we have to own that we are not inherently good, that we all are colleagues. We all devour things. We're not just Shiva.
I think that separation is really key to what's going on in our modern society, of like what's toxic about our modern society. Is that separation from killing, the separation from death, the entire like death industrial complex of when someone dies, they are taken away and like they are processed in this way that is so apart from us. It stops us from internalizing this reality, this finite reality. in a way that it can be incredibly damaging.
And this is what this COVID does, is COVID, for the first time in our lifetimes, in the lifetimes of most people on this planet, and Zach, you've talked about this before, this is the first time that all of humanity collectively has been threatened at once.
By the same thing.
And we cannot help. And this kind of goes back up to way back at 829, a quote, further back, from Amy. She goes, I think people are more open to being real on social media lately because we've seen some large movements in people being comfortable to share their experiences, when in the past things were not talked about in the open. The Me Too movement, and even being more open to sharing mental health topics. So both the Me Too movement and now this COVID, like, people are hurting. People are becoming more public about hurting. So now the question is, how do we have both sides of these conversations about, and I think COVID's forcing this, because there's people die when you don't have money. People, if they don't die, they become miserable. What happens to the 80-year-old who just lost their entire life savings?
Yeah.
What happens to the 80-year-old who gets kicked out of their nursing home? So that's something that the left doesn't always address, that the right brings up. And it's a very valid point. And I think it's become more clear to the left, just as the fact that this virus cannot be hyped away and cannot be conspiracy theoried away becomes more clear to the extreme parts of the right, that this is going to bring, hopefully, if it's done well, can bring people to a middle ground where we have to talk about both sides of this.
The identifying with what you think, the Robert Anton Wilson quote of belief is the death of thought. Something like that.
Yeah.
So I'm a leftist. I'm a conservative. It's like, right now I observe my worldview, the way I see the chessboard, and my station in the world has me falling right of center. At this moment. Am I a conservative? Oh, I was just making an example, but it does sometimes. I have moments. It's like, if I felt threatened, I become a conservative. If I feel like we have enough and I become a leftist. I think right now that we're in a place where I want to make leftist chess moves. But anyway, the identifying with a conservative and liberal, the way I think it can be integrated, because it was a thing that definitely has caused us a bunch of pain. It's brought us to this place now, is to see it as like, well, it's a dialectic, and it's the scientific method at work. The best way to get, I think maybe it is that the smartest political move is when you get who's really, really good for being a really good left talker, Noam Chomsky. I
think that he's almost on near the gutter in some cases. Like, he's pretty far to the left.
So if Noam Chomsky and Ben Shapiro had to come to a compromise,
I'm not familiar with Ben Shapiro. Like,
he's an intellectual talk dog. I call him intellectual attack dog. He's like really
got it.
He's really good at the art of debating, and he can articulate the conservative. And sometimes there's the thing where they say Western, the West. He's very good at defending the virtues of the West and of monotheism and of conservatism. And if we're in a game where it's a debate to, like, Ben Shapiro destroys, there are many videos where he's destroying someone who doesn't do intellectual warfare as well. But if we see it, instead of us trying to beat each other, which when we're trying to make law and like decide how, I mean, there's a lot of sentimentality wrapped in that, because this is the way in which people will suffer, the game that we will be in, that some people will be winners and losers. But if we were to see it as, if there's somebody who is a left and if there's someone who is a right, then they are peer review and they make us smarter by getting those two. Yeah, that. I want to see more of that. I want to have a chess tournament on the lawn of the Capitol building in Lansing, where there have recently been these armed protests, where there was nobody on the other side. It was all just a showing of like, we are so removed from this, and there's a Democratic governor, and I'm sure there's somebody there who could articulate their stance there, but it's really like just a big showing of fuck you. Time, and I'm hearing a lot of time to water the tree of liberty with the blood of tyrants. Calling Gretchen a tyrant. Anyway, I want to have chess matches where we all get together on the lawn of the Capitol, and there's people on the left, on the right, who are having political conversations as they play a game of chess in the container of, this is a game, and we're making each other smarter. We're trying to understand each other. So anyway, to get back to the toxic positivity, I think all of that, and it's difficult now not to get off onto politics and with the nature of our world right now, but avoiding, don't talk about what is it, sex, religion, and politics? Mm-hmm. Yeah, sex, religion, because it's difficult. That is what causes more difficulty for us.
And I think we've hit all of those multiple times today. So
yeah, we went into the true nature of reality.
So I wanted to pose this question to you guys to kind of get us off of the political landscape, because man, I'm sick of thinking about that. I feel like it's just in every conversation I have lately. How do you guys practice your own shadow work? What does shadow work look like to you? And yeah, let's talk about that.
So I found an interesting one, because I've tried to do shadow work in different ways throughout my life, but this one kind of snuck up on me. And it was realizing that one thing that fucked me up as a child is that my parents raised me very well. And I learned at a very early age that if my parents were really upset, and I'm probably talking like 5 years old, if I could come to them with a logical argument, they would calm down, they would listen to me, and they would change their approach. And I thought that was normal. This probably explains a bit why I'm hyperverbal, because I'm like, well, holy shit. If I just am logical, then I can get everything to work. And then what I realized later in my life is I ended up being very socially anxious. And I ended up being very socially anxious. And it took me a while to kind of figure out why, because I have a really hard time. Like, if I do something wrong and I believe I did it wrong, like, I can fucking own that shit and go, okay, what do I change? Because to me, that's logical. But what I can't do, and what so many other people grew up with, is someone going to you and going, you're wrong because purple. Like, there's not a reason for why they're wrong. And then they've learned to respond with intensity. If someone is mad at me or has conflict or disagreement with me, and I don't think there's a logical reason for it, I freak out. I don't know what to do. And that makes me socially less skilled. And then I become very defensive in a way that can then also hurt people. Because then what I try to do is I try to take people's intensity and go, that's the problem. We need to calm it down. And then we can have a real discussion. And that's fucking invalidating, right? And it took me so long to get that. And I'm still learning that, because this is new to me. So my shadow was thinking that, and here's the thing, just like so many things in this world, all the psychology books and the psychology training that I sought out supported my pre-existing point of view, which is anger's the problem, validate it, calm it down, then you can have the real conversation. So what I'm trying to do is to have that real conversation while that intensity is still high, even when it's uncomfortable for me. And that's still really hard for me. And that's work I'm doing like in an ongoing way.
Yeah. Man, I had an experience recently where there was somebody who, in my observation, declined the invitation to the emotional intelligence dance. And I more or less metaphorically have stormed out of the room like, well, fuck it, we can't hang out then. And I see, that's a whole tangent of like, I see these things where it's like, man, is it the most loving for me to engage in almost just well-meaning trickery sometimes? I want to be really, really forthright with everyone. I want everyone to be really forthright with me. And that's what I see as one of the opportunities of the isolation that we've recently experienced, is we've gotten to go into our chrysalis and be so left alone with ourselves to find out who am I.
Oh yeah.
Remember when it started, I put up a post like, oh, I could, okay, my usual career has been entirely dashed for the year, but I could become a babysitter, and schools just got canceled. People are going to need a babysitter. And it's like, oh, you're not even going to be able to go to people's homes. You have to just stay away from people. Oh, how do we help the healthcare workers? Other than I don't have money, I can't like send them things. I can't help them in material ways. It's like, there's nothing you can do to go to anyone. So it kind of, I saw a situation where like, there's a crisis in my world, and there when the reflexes of wanting to do something to help, because I also have a laziness demon and fuck you, let the world burn demon that is just like, oh, there's pain and suffering going on in the world. Cool, I'm gonna enjoy myself. But there's also the little angel that's like, how do we help? And that little angel was like, well, there's not really much you can do right now. So what I kind of turned it into was, this time is for me to do the thing where the best thing you can do for the world is try to better yourself. And so now it's like we're slowly opening up our social circles, and it's an opportunity to really curate who's in your world. And now you can do that with a like delete me if you, sort of like when people put up a social network post of like, if you this, then delete me, get out of my life. So you can do with that if you want. But that's gonna bereft you of the opportunity to become more, have others. So the question was about shadow work. So I've recently find more and more exponentially that the like the trauma thread, if you want to call it, of my life, my karmatic curriculum, whatever the fuck, my situation is, I need to address, like, as we say, my shadow, like the darkness of my existence is more intense than I thought 2 days ago. And that thing that you mentioned earlier, Brick, where I can't feel bad about my stuff because hashtag first world problems, hashtag privilege. That being able to, there's other people that are suffering more. It doesn't, because
that doesn't make your suffering any less.
And you cannot address it, and you can't do the thing that is your shadow work unless it's the only thing on the table. It's you. This, whatever it is with you, that's why we're here. This is what we're here to talk about. Is
and to bring it back really quickly to kind of the left, which is, and I'm sorry, just to tie a different tone. I'm sorry. But it's that I think, again, we asked, what is Trump the shadow of? Again, we're going to move right back out of this. But it's that idea that no, there is some suffering that is more valid, right? And once that happens, the other person is going to get louder. Whenever you go, my suffering's more valid than your suffering, then the other person goes, you don't know my suffering, and they get louder and they get more violent. And so again, it's that balance between setting that boundary of go, no, you can't keep acting this way. And no, your suffering is real. It's different than mine. And I don't know what it is. To have curiosity. So one thing we haven't talked too much about, pulling us back out of politics, back into kind of general tools, is, again, how do you balance dialectics? And to me, one of the opposites of judgment, and judgment does have its place, is curiosity. How do you bring radical curiosity to people who are different than you? That doesn't mean you allow them to do certain behaviors, but how do you bring radical curiosity?
And to yourself, not just to, how do you bring radical curiosity to what the fuck's going on in your mind? And I want to like go back to something that Zach said about like this moment right now is a time where we are with ourselves, and this is an opportunity to better ourselves. This is something that's like on my mind every single day, because my shadow is, I am not good enough, I need to be better, is my constant neurosis. And I really want to pull up, can you pull up what Brent's saying about the aspect of toxic positivity, light working, that tells you should feel light at all times and the darkness is inherently evil.
I got to ask you that. What is light work? What is light working? What is that concept? I have no idea.
Kind of, probably a little bit what you were saying about like the angel work and like, I'm going to affect change only by positivity.
Someone who is a light worker,
yes,
does toxic positivity as a
sometimes
right.
I can
see. I would say that we have a I want to switch definitions of things to be more functional. Like, so instead of being like light work is stupid, if that's the definition of light work, it's like, well, I would say that I am a light worker, and one of the things that I wish to be of service here is to shine light on super duper dark shit that other people don't want to talk about, because my mind frame for so long has been I live this little light of mine exists in a shadowy nightmare elephant graveyard, and that's what I see. Reality is that's what beauty is to me, is like, it's a pitch black panorama with a little rainbow star, and that's what we're doing, is like we're existing in contrast, and by evading 50% of reality, we're not. How could that be called light work? You be the light by illuminating, but you don't want to spend your whole time just illuminating the room. You want to be the light at some point, but we just spent 2 months in just having to turn the light inward, like Jill having to turn the lens inward more so than we ever have. We didn't, you couldn't come to the rescue. Your best chess move at that point was to stay home, to isolate. And I think we all found some shit out about ourselves. And now we're going to go back to the game.
So kind of coming back to Brent and this concept that things that are bad and things that are good. I think that's one of the fundamental challenges of kind of figuring life out, is, again, like what I said, that I used to think that it was good that I was building my students' confidence by not hitting them. It turns out that was kind of not really great, right? That this dance, and it has to be a dance of these different dialectics. If you can't dance, that's what tends to become toxic. It's that inability to move as the situation or context changes. And you mentioned functional. I think, to me, that's a really good definition of functional. How do you find the function of your current approach? And is that actually doing what you hope it does? And if you don't connect to reality and you stay up in this kind of belief that I'm doing good because I'm thinking positive, you're divorced from the actual present moment.
Yeah, I'm fine. This is my awareness of this is exponentially exploding every day as I am more and more honest with myself. My ability, let's take the free will out of it, my likelihood of doing good in my life is not a matter of my becoming good. It's doing it. It's a choice. It's a choice, and it's a choice now, and it's a choice now. So if I identify as a good person, I'm taking the choice out. So Fabriza says light workers tend to be empaths. That's another thing that we identify with. It's like I gotta say, I fucking hate that. I fucking hate that term, an empath. It's like everybody can empathy.
That's not necessarily true.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Okay. So everybody who can do, I mean, you could intellectualize it, and then you could make it as a choice that you're doing empathy, but not feeling it. If that's what you mean, like you're talking.
So empathy is a learned trait that if you are, so again, going back to my trauma class, babies who are not held when like they're infants, that is something that's them learning empathy, is that when I am in pain, someone will help me. that feels good, and they start to realize, okay, well, maybe I should do that to other people. If you don't have that, if you are not taught that, you don't have empathy.
Yeah. No, so, but I'm saying that to build it as a skill as opposed to identify it as like, because if you're saying I'm an empath, you're saying I am empathy. I am he who empathizes. You know, I am they who empathize. As opposed to like, I feel empathy when I feel it, and I behave with kindness and compassion when I choose to, which is that's the game I see myself as playing.
Oh, Brick, I can't hear you.
You are inaudible.
I was saving you from my coughs, so I was.
You can turn up a little bit.
So how's that?
Down a little bit more.
No, I meant like as in like turn up, like
I
meant like vegetable.
So okay, wait. Empaths. So we defined judgment before. So judgment's when we judge ourselves or other people, and often those judgments are temporary, but they can be stuck, right? This other part is identity. And identity, when we identify with something, this also hides a big part of who we are from the rest of us. So there's people who we know who identify with their intellect. There's people who we know who identify with their sense of humor. There's people that we know that identify with their performance or their sexuality, other people with their emotions. And here's the thing, all of those people are bigger than those things. And if I identify with my empathy, that means that I'm going to elevate this feeling of feeling other people's feelings above the rest of me. And then again, that's one of those things that pulls me away from the present moment. That then means that I kind of come out of balance in my own life. So I think we have to be very careful with what we identify with. And I find that I'm usually at my best mental health wise when I have a sense of humor about myself. Because by definition, if you can smile and laugh at yourself a little bit, you aren't taking yourself too seriously. You're not over-identifying with that, right? But at the same time, we have to understand that we are unique and we have skills and qualities other people don't have. So we also want to kind of take that a little bit seriously. And I think that's part of that dance too, right? So dancing with identity, dancing with judgment, but not allowing those to crystallize and get stuck.
Yeah. Just one more thing about empathy. The experience of empathy, if we're defining empathy as the felt emotion, Fabrizio says sympathy is logical understanding of pain. Empathy is taking it on and can be toxic, i.e., painful, uncomfortable to feel empathy. And Corey says affective versus cognitive empathy, and that's what I was saying. Like, I think that you could teach us if there is such a thing as a 100% neurologically sociopathic doesn't have the empathy gland. You could have an intellectual understanding of it. So
and then they can use that as a way to manipulate others.
Yeah. So we're talking. So, and when I hear empath said, what makes me have a distaste for the phrase is that it will be said as like, oh, I can't go into the Walmart. I'm an empath. If I have to be approached with one of these fucking peasants and all of their trauma, it's gonna hurt me to be around someone who is so.
Yeah.
You know, the high vibe culture thing.
That's also like the leftist thing where it's just cushioning. Like we need to be uncomfortable. We need to create some calluses.
Yeah. Don't go. I'm not saying going to Walmart though. That isn't. It is a nightmare, and there's better places for you to spend your money.
It's also the rich right. I think both the far left and the far right do that. Like the extreme light workers can do that, and the extreme rich can do that. I don't want to be around dirty, ugly things because I feel that, and that feels uncomfortable.
The gated community.
You know, kind of going back to this, I think with that logical empathy, it also is kind of a stage. Like when I was in my 20s, in my late teens, I cared about people and I could understand, like I had a logical empathy, but I didn't get emotional empathy the way I did in my late 20s and early 30s. Like that's where I really started to get it. And here's the thing, I was a lot more efficient back in my 20s. Like my mind, because I was less caught up in all of these feelings, I felt like my mind was sharper at times, but I would never want to go back to that. I was also more cynical and jaded, but that's a whole different, it's related, but it's different. I would never want to go back to that, because with the pain that I feel now, I feel more engaged with my life, and I feel more engaged with my friends. And even with the discomfort and pain, it feels better than that more living up in my head sort of experience I had early on.
Yeah, I see this as the ketamine versus mushrooms problem, where there is a bliss and a euphoria and a unity, like a universal, holistic word for oneness, experience of connectedness with everything that I've experienced in the state of neurochemical dissociation. And also, they say you can get there meditating, but ain't no turtle got time for that, or at least I haven't gotten there meditating. But there's those who say that they can get to the non-dual state from meditating. I might have gotten there once or twice, but usually I'm into cheat codes. But anyway, so there's a unity and such a love that can be felt from the neurochemical temporary destruction, obliteration of my ego, where I experience the world egolessness. I experience the world as egoless observer. And then there's psilocybin mushrooms, which is we're really digging our roots into everything. And I'm really, really connected with my pain. I'm really, really connected with the particular traumatic thread of my existence. I am very, very aware of where it hurts and how much work it's going to be to make that better. And yeah, that's kind of like that. There's my political spectrum in my head. It's like, do I divorce myself from reality, or do I? To divorce oneself from the felt. The pain of empathy, and that's it really
it's the pain of existence too. It reminds me a little bit of the very two different views of like there's like tantric Yoda and then yoga Yoda.
Tantric Yoda.
There's an image.
That's my band. Yeah, that's a band.
There's tantric yoga and more like Buddhist yoga, and so tantric yoga wants to feel this body, wants to be in this existence. We chose this existence to be here and feel all the facets, whether it's pain or whether it's pleasure. We want to be here. Whereas more of a Buddhist standpoint would be, I want to meditate the fuck out of existence, because existence is pain and suffering. So I'm just going to
you said Yoda.
Yeah.
That is the Jedi and the Sith. The Jedi are all about non-attachment and don't give in to your passions. And the Sith is, yes, feel your hatred. Get a fucking rock hard boner about the nightmare that you are in. God damn it. That's why we're here. This is why we're here, to be this. And you can be both. That's what we're finding.
Again, on a slightly different axis, you've got Mr. Agent Smith and Neo, where Agent Smith, instead of embracing, well, there's hatred there, but is really, he just wants everything to be him endlessly. That's that virus metaphor that he embodies, where Neo kind of allows for all things but holds a center, if we're going to get all kind of new agey about a movie here. But there's something that Brent mentions here. Empaths also have the self-responsibility, and this is where we get into that dialectic. To learn to protect themselves energetically, it's not the responsibility of others to tend to your inner self. And I would say that there's a balance there, right? That as somebody who is empathetic, that it shows us that we can hurt other people. And as somebody who's an empath, that means I can be hurt. And so how do we balance that interplay in a community or a relationship where both people are going to have pain, both people are going to have discomfort, but how can you have that pain and discomfort in useful and enlivening ways? And how do you empathize without getting lost in each other's empathy? Because I think that's another aspect of toxic positivity, is a desire, again, for endless empathy and validation. And how do you kind of have that give and take, where I have feelings, you have feelings, and we dance with that?
Yeah. How do we get the benefits of this ideal that we seek? You know, sometimes things are declared safe spaces. I would opine that there is no such thing as an emotional safe space. We can make things physically safe.
Safer spaces is much better way to put that.
Yeah. Well, that we're not going to, I like to create conversational spaces in which I deny any two of you you don't have the move in this game of chess. Like your knight can't do that. Your queen doesn't move that way. Don't become adversarial with each other. Like we're learning from each other right now. So how do you get those sort of spaces without asking people to dissociate from their felt identity, which is the story of their life? And I'm entering into a dance in my life where I want to have a children's communication and performance side of things, in which I'm finding more and more that it's not about this being a emotionally safe space. If we have to discuss difficult things, as one Mr. Saint Rogers did, but it's just about changing the vernacular, the not using the word vernacular in front of a 3-year-old. However, I would opine that if we're not super verbose around our children, being super verbose around your children is what makes them become Russell Brandian verbosity capable. Anyway, the thing I was saying is we're always I'm noticing that we're if we're doing what could be called art therapy, which is I would say that's pretty much like what I want to do. Like I don't want to just make pretty displays for people to, oh, look at that, was beautiful, and it's, you know, it's something that jettisoned out of a good person and now there's this thing that is that you can just like watching like a fireworks show. Like let's create experiences, let's invoke the mind state of reality, the musical, the festival. It's us, it's this, it's now. That is a enterprise of inviting people in to, as we say, like dance with our devils, to find a way to be playful about our problems, you know,
humor, and
whether
like
we do that as a magical turtle or a Zachary. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to turtle rock.
That's okay, Turtle.
Yeah, I was just saying whether we do that as a turtle or a Zachary is irrelevant. Yeah.
I'd say that humor as well as performance art, and I think that's where many of us, us three, come from and are connected by, is the performance art aspect of darkness. And why is that healing? Why is seeing that type of pain or that type of humor, why is that helpful to you guys?
Dark humor?
Yeah.
I think gallows humor is that's how you get through the experience of the gallows. If I'm being walked up to a place where I am going to be put to death in a way that may be painful or may be over in a second, I turn to my, I was going to say comrade, but that makes it specific. I turn to the other person who is about to be executed, and I say, "We're really fucked, aren't we, man?" And that allows me to take the next step up to the thing and get it over with, because at this point, that's we went dark there. But that's we are all being led to our deaths in beautiful, unique ways, and
walking each other home.
Yeah, we're walking each other home, and by cracking jokes as we go on, Robin Hood and Little John hopping through the forest, laughing and dancing and singing what the other had to say. Yeah, you got something, Brick?
So yeah, I think that. So one time I went to an event in Chicago, and I came, and it was kind of known for being very upbeat and had a certain vibe to it. And my friend asked me to bring my flame-throwing top hat, and I came with my evil clown mask, and I came into this very happy vibe sort of place, and like
just destroyed it all up.
And exactly, this is what he says to me. Like I had 3 people come up to me, as like, fuck yeah, we needed this. I need a little Detroit in here. And they came up and hugged me. I cackled, and some of the hippies ran away, and they loved it. And they created this space. And the reason, and something that I've always kind of valued about the Detroit creative community, is that kind of like New Orleans, kind of like Oakland, that there are certain cities, and even to some degree Seattle, that you have these creative communities that kind of play to that darkness a bit. And
because they've all come out of suffering. There's so much suffering in those cities.
I think we get hurt more when we pretend that darkness and pain doesn't exist. And so communities that have gone through pain and suffering, if you can bring it in, and you can bring it in with some levity, you can bring it in with some love and some playfulness, it teaches you to have a relationship with these unavoidable parts of ourself in the world, because it's the parts of us that we deny that end up hurting us or hurting other people. And I think that's kind of the heart of shadow work. How do you have a healthy relationship with the unavoidable darkness, hurt, and pain?
The solution to your broken leg is not more morphine. It is to reset the bones and begin the. Then I would use the word healing. You are You're healing that leg. That's coming together, as we all will when we die. So as we've like just presumed for the reality tunnel of this particular podcast. You mentioned hippies. And that's an identity, and that's a social archetype, a subgenius, a subspecies of humanity. So the cloudflower love and light hippie thing, I am of that. To some people, perceive me as being of that. I have noticed that one of the memes that is growing in, I hear it mentioned a lot, of like that Western medicine is just about addressing and treating symptoms and never getting to the root cause. And yeah, I would agree with that. But some people take it to the extreme, and they identify with being anti-Western medicine, like only ever seek a holistic answer. And sometimes people die because you have a broken bone, you get a fucking doctor for that.
Put some lavender oil on it, bro.
Yeah, I like the thing. If you have an imaginary problem, if you have a real problem, you need a real solution. If you have an imaginary problem, which is psychological, emotional, anything, you need an imaginary solution. That's not the thing I'm talking about, though. With that thing of we're only addressing symptoms, that's kind of like what it is to do toxic positivity, to do like, let's not talk about what's difficult, because when it comes up and can be discussed, like that's the moment to get to the root, and to just create the seemingly safe, happy space to have a party tonight where we don't get into difficulty. Like that is just addressing the just patting down the symptom. Like we can get to that. I pulled wheats from my mother's garden today, and it was the most intense metaphorically viscerally felt experience of like, I can pull this thing up, I can just rip out the visible weed, or I can like go in and have to dig down with like 3 fingers, giving it all my fucking elbow mustard, and get down to the bottom of this thing. And anyway, so I wanted to just present that to, if you are a self-identifying cloudflower hippie, everything is love and light, think of the metaphor of Western medicine bad, only addressing symptoms, to that of good vibes only, no bad vibes allowed here. Like those moments of difficulty, of something that needs to be talked about, that needs to be discussed, that like the elephant graveyard where the light never touches, the sometimes the elephant in the room, discussing the elephant in the room that will soon die and rot in the elephant graveyard, like that is what it is to do holistic, I'm going to say, healing.
I like it. And at the same time, you said that imaginary solutions are best for imaginary problems with psychological. And I think that can be really true. Like the placebo effect and kind of doing like imaginal work and all of these things can be really powerful. Also was really powerful. And I think this is important when we're talking about toxic positivity, is when is positivity and what form is positivity actually useful? And I think that when we're trying to think positive or only have positive vibes, that can be useful for a time. Like it's really wonderful to go into a really curated space where you can let go and you have this amazing experiences that you're led through, and it feels great and it smells great and it looks great and it sounds great. Some of the greatest moments of my life have happened in those spaces. So I'm really glad that they exist. And if we try to live that way from day to day, then
you're going to drive yourself crazy, and you're going to feel like you're not enough. You're going to feel that you are doing something wrong because everything isn't love and light.
No.
Yeah. I do believe that heaven is a place on earth, but it is not all of it. And in the same way, I would say
it also is probably kind of boring.
Yeah, I think that. I mean, I think it's perfect that we use that. That's a perfect metaphor. You go to heaven when you die. You go to unity. Perhaps you go to the unlimited dream space. Yeah, I had the thought today when I was thinking about that we were going to be having this conversation. I was thinking about life is suffering a lot. It's like, well, yeah, to be biology involves to suffer. However, like to get reality, all the things that reality is, which I don't think we're seeing all of that right now. Reality isn't suffering, but life kind of is, and I think so. I think to answer the question of like when is it not being toxically positive, but using optimism, positivity in a constructive, good way, and not to be like ignoring the problems. For me, it's like, let's admit that this is an infinite rainbow nightmare spectrum, and there's definitely nightmarish shit to this, and let's try to have as much fun with that as possible. And if you can curate your bonfire, your party, then I like to hang out with people where that's assumed at the beginning. It's like there's dark shit, and we're gonna have as much fun as we can here. And I don't get to tell other people to have that. It's like, oh, we're going to be doing some shadow work. We're going to be discussing our deepest traumatic threads tonight. Like that's not how you go out into the public square. But in the inner cloister, the inner council, if you will, that's how I like to hang out around bonfires with my friends.
And kind of another way, because Brent asks, what is the line between positivity and toxic positivity? So for me, it's not really a line, but a different place of application. So if I'm going in my thoughts, I can only think good thoughts, or I go into a space and I can only present good sides of myself. That becomes toxic because it prevents me from experiencing all of the world and being all parts of myself. So I'm being both disassociated from the world and unauthentic. But where positivity is useful is to look at where you want to go, and then how to get around problems. So there's a metaphor I like to use a lot of trying to drive a car, because a lot of people spend their life trying to get rid of negativity or get away from it. And I would ask the question, what would it be like to get in a car parked on the side of the road in a busy city and start to drive by moving away from everything you don't want to hit?
Oh.
Right? So
I did that in Grand Theft Auto.
Exactly. The small tiles, that lamppost, that pothole, all the things you don't want to hit. And eventually your car is going to be smoking, your tires are going to be smoking, and you're going to get out and go, fuck this. The opposite side, like the toxic positivity, is like, the world is aligned with my being. I will close my eyes and go south. And then you're going to end up hitting some small children and ducks and all sort of things, and it'll be really bad. That is toxic positivity.
Row to shore, but pray to God. No, pray to God, but row to shore is one of those things.
Exactly. So you got to ask where you want to go. And you got to ask, and when something gets in your way, you've got to acknowledge it. You've got to be aware of the problems and the pain in your life. And if your car starts to smoke, you probably should pull over and take care of that. But you're always looking towards that end goal outside of yourself. And I think that's where functional or what students would call practical optimism come in. Like, you can adapt, you can move towards things, you can achieve things. And after you've achieved it, enjoy it and then move on to something else. And it's that rhythm and that balance.
Yeah. I'd say optimism, my working definition of optimism is what good positivity is, which is like, we are in a lucid effort to optimize, knowing that something like 50% of reality is eternally darkness and difficulty and death. And it's I mean, if there's an enemy for me in my in turtle experience, it is I do not like to allow myself to despair for long, because the destination of despair is little itty bitty suicides or literally that, my despairing thread goes right to, I don't want to be here, this sucks. But if I can just be doing the dance, which I think is inherently what we're in, which is like, okay, there's the there is my shadow, there is the infinite darkness of space, and I'm this little magical turtle in all of this. Like that turtle being optimistic, or like swimming towards the light, like that's what I want to do. So anyway, so stopping myself from despairing, what would you, if I could ask you that, Brick, as a therapist, like, is it all right for me to not allow myself to despair?
So like, I want to go back. I think Brent kind of gets at that about how to approach negativity in a useful way. And a little higher up, darkness is amazing. In the dark, you get to gather close and lie to rest or lick your wounds. Darkness is a blanket of comfort. And I know both of you can relate to this from your own goth industrialism growing up. Like there's a certain joy to like finding your self in this place of pain and suffering that not everybody lets themselves experience. And there is a beauty. Like, imagine a Russian novel without pain and darkness. Imagine a film noir movie without pain and darkness. Imagine a horror movie without pain and darkness. Like, there is a certain pleasure and beauty in painful and dark things that can be appreciated. And it's also a time that depression, every emotion has a benefit. And so what's the benefit of depression? If I've just lost my job or someone I love just died, what's the benefit of not continuing with my life as normal and slowing down and pausing?
Yeah.
Because I'm sad.
Well, being with the sad is like, that's not what I mean when I say that I try not to allow myself to go into despair. Like, I guess my working definition of the verb of when I am despairing, I'm leaning into the void. I don't just want to take a void bath, and that's the thing that I do. That is something that is part of my, is it repertoire? My
Practice.
Part of my routine in life. Like, you wake up, you brush your teeth, you take a shower. Like, I take fucking void baths. I put on eye mask and earplugs with these headphones and playing brown noise and different. There's a whole bunch of things, pink noise, red noise, this many hertz. Like, so that it makes it as nothing as possible. And if I had an isolation tank, I'd go in there every day. I need that. I can't just sit in lotus position and meditate. I feel my body. I feel the whole room. Like, I take a cheat code, supplementary with this experience to achieve as close as I can get to fucking nothingness for an hour, because it really helps me come back here and feel like I can take this on.
I get what you're saying now. So to that end, I mean, this is part of what mindfulness practice is. Like, mindfulness practice is an ability to sit with the present moment, to step back to the part of you that observes, and the key here is to broaden out and to hold all of these events and all of this information within you and watch it happen within you and around you as events that are continually moving. That's one definition of mindfulness, is one approach, but I think it's a powerful one. And you can get it by cutting off sensory information, because the present moment is infinite. And sometimes people have a hard time cutting out their sensory experience. So when you do so, it makes it easier to experience thoughts and feelings inside of yourself as events, and to have that observing part of yourself by watching it, process it. And process is one of those words used in therapy that's kind of a throwaway buzzword. So I want to kind of define it. So imagine that you have an Amazon storeroom, and imagine that instead of a computer system or shelves, you just throw every package in the storeroom. And some of it is like plush little anime characters and books and toothbrushes, but it's also like black mambas and razor blades and dirty syringes. And every time you have to wander into your mind, your heart, you got to get one of these orders, you have to go through all of these boxes, and you never know what you're going to get. That is what happens inside of an unexamined heart or an unexamined mind, especially when there's been trauma or pain there. But when you can sit and you can have that quiet, it's like you're building shelves and you're getting a computer system, and it organizes this. So you don't have to trigger those painful memories at the wrong times. You want to keep them because they're important, but you don't want to trigger them every time you go in that storeroom.
Yeah. They can make you the hero of that thing that you have felt empathy for because you've experienced it. You can now go out and speak as one who has experienced that. And there's a really good comment, question, and then question answered pretty thoroughly. Brent asked, where's the line between positivity and toxic positivity? And Corey says, when positivity is used as a means to deny or avoid reality instead of a context to move through reality.
Yeah, very much that. What do I want? What do I care about? What's important to me? And how do I want to express myself in the world? And this is what, kind of going back to Chrissy in that Indra's net of jewels, what makes my self-expression different from other people's, and what makes what's important to me worth expressing in the world. And this moves us away from positivity and negativity into what is myself fully expressed and who's drawn to that. Because when I'm expressing myself out here, the people who are drawn to what I'm saying are the people who kind of have some of that in them. And the people who are ignoring it or laughing at it or mad at it are the people with their own different values. Now we can make that like, this is a problem, or we can make it more of a dance, or people don't need to listen to this. They can go somewhere else. So how do we express ourselves, and what is our positivity? What does our expression look like that's different from other people's? And how do we make room for that?
There's a fuckaroo of a comment. Would anyone like to read that?
New Age, good vibe movement, yoga light worker culture can have some of the same negative effects as religions and cults. It's possible to enjoy the benefits of a culture without handing your mind over to only understanding the world through a certain set of terms and ideas accepted by a specific circle of people, with only positive words and outlooks that are quite frankly unrealistic. Positivity can be a form of denial. I think it's wise to err on the side of caution when adopting other people, ... So it sounds like she's talking about dogma and this idea that our belief about reality is something that other people should share because they need to understand reality the way I do right now.
Yeah, if we defining the game that we are playing together is so important. And back to we were just in the chrysalis of isolation. There was a global pandemic, and we were staying at home and staying isolated, and that was our way of being helpful to the world, was to isolate. And also, in whether or not you lucidly took the opportunity to look within and do shadow work and do some house cleaning, whether metaphorical, psycho-spiritual house cleaning, or literally clean your house. Like, we had this intense opportunity. We're about to re-enter well, not all at once, but if the world, as we're saying, opens back up, like, we're going to be so much more starkly ourselves. I'm seeing like this experience they're about to have this summer is gonna be a thing. Both obviously both the dark and the light. A lot of it starkly. That seems so defining the game. Oh yeah, I brought that up because curating your friend group and who you really let in and who you're vulnerable in conversation with. Fuck, did I lose it? Oh yeah, we define the game together. I mean, to have these moments of conversation with groups of friends where it's like, yeah, what is a common goal of life to us? Is it? I mean, because we hedonism pretty hard. Me and my friends, we like pleasure. we do pleasure, and not but and. We're up to something here. We're on to something that is we're actually volunteering for something difficult.
So maybe this is because we're going at the 2-hour mark. And before we started, Zach, we talked about what we might kind of theme the next podcast. And we talked about living an unscripted life. And we kind of got to this a little bit through this idea of toxic positivity and this kind of extreme light worker. We talked about it a bit with these kind of extreme in politics. Like, we can kind of look at some of these extremes as scripts. They're like scripts that are handed to us, and it's easy to live this way.
Yeah.
And this is and if you have the right script and you find other people with other scripts, you're like, hey, I know how to do this thing. It's easy to relate to you. It's like talking about sports or your favorite show. It's an easy way to relate to other human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of what we're talking about here, and I think would be great to continue in the next conversation, is what does it mean to have an unscripted life that's maybe inspired by scripts that you've seen? Maybe you find playing these scripts once in a while is fun and you like to do it, but how do you kind of weave that path that's about your personal expression into the world? And what do you have to face from the world when you do that? Because if you're authentically being you, and I'm authentically being me, and you're authentically being you, at some point we are going to disagree or be bored or not understand one another. And then if we're hanging out, we got to decide how to do that. Yeah. And there's a dance there. And we also have to do that with our culture when the culture is going through extremes.
Yeah. So a rubric to reality, is a dogma, a sacred text, a religion. Right. You know, these are games that you enter into, and now it's becoming more clear to a lot of us that there's a menu of them, and you can select from the menu, or you could do the unscripted life and do the path of the nonsense person. And yeah, that's a really good chaos versus structure. I'd say that, are we agreed that will be the topic of the next podcast? Will be.
I think so. I think so.
So the dialectic there is dogma bad, dogma good. Mm-hmm. Dogma is bad. It does this. It confines us. Like you said, the scaffolding, or what was it?
Cage. Yeah. So I really like the idea. Are you using this script? Are you using this aspect of your personality as a scaffolding or a cage? Mm-hmm. Like, are you building something because within the structure that then you can go off into new directions? Or are you saying that this script, I can't go outside of this? So we'll be doing the next one. It looks like 2 weeks from now would be June 4th.
June 4th, we're going to talk about the structure game, dogma good, dogma bad.
Of trying to live our own unscripted life and how to maybe use scripts well. Because I think everybody takes on certain scripts and roles, and that can be an easy, fun thing to do, and it can become a problem. So
awesome. All right.
Okay. Thanks everybody for joining us on here.
Bye Magic. Bye Brick.
Goodbye.
Bye world. Bye everyone. This has been great. This has been excellent.
Love you guys.
Love you too.
Happy reality, everybody. And we are not live.